the International Mentoring Community Mentoring Lounge, where we have a conversation, dialogue, answer questions about all things mentoring. I'm Dr. Stephen Hobbs, and joining me is Doug Lawrence. We'll introduce ourselves in a few minutes, but I just thought that I'd give you a little bit of an idea where we're going today, and we're going to be taking a look at the connection between predictability and mentoring. And I said to Doug, actually, when I first did this, I thought it was practicality of mentoring. And then I went, oh, hang on, I wrote predictability of mentoring. Oh, okay, let's figure out what that means. And off we went and created today's session. So we're just going to go over what's the definition of predictability, and then we're going to connect it to mentoring. And then there's some thoughts we want to share with you, considerations about predictability and mentoring from our perspectives as those who are practitioners. I'll certainly be diving into the Doug's background and see what he's got to do to add some things. And then what we're going to do is offer to those of you who are mentees some ideas about supporting this idea of predictability within the mentoring arrangement and connection. And or we might suggest how you as a mentor might encourage the mentee to do these 7 items, these 7 actions. So that's where we're going today. So I think what we'll do here, Doug, is just introduce ourselves. You want to go first?
I sure can. So I'm Doug Lawrence, and I'm the founder of Talent C People Services Incorporated, and I'm also the co-founder of the International Mentoring Community. And with the IMC, or International Mentoring Community, I'm the Director of Practice and Outreach.
And I'm Dr. Stephen Hobbs. I am the Director of Certification and Education. And I have my own business, Wealth Movement, and it's to do with nature-informed enthusiasts who may be entrepreneurs, employees, or even elders. And they're looking at moving forward with their ideas, and they can use mentoring as one of the educating approaches. So Doug, why don't we jump into it? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a definition of predictability, and then, as I say, we'll move into mentoring, make the connection, and then look at some considerations and those 7 ideas for the mentees. So if you have any questions or you have any comments, please add them into the chat function wherever you are. We're on Facebook and YouTube. And love to have you join us in the conversations. So to be able to start with, I'm actually going to read a definition. I thought it was a pretty good one about predictability. And remember, I mentioned earlier, when I first proposed this to Doug, I said, we'll do the practicality of mentoring, and then it became the predictability of mentoring. And I went, what is it that brings me from practicality to predictability? And sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. And then as I started to dig into it, and this definition I'm going to share with you, I went, I think I know why we're doing this one. And here it is. The definition of predictable is a person for whom it is easy to anticipate actions, or something that is easy to foresee or anticipate what it will do. And I can connect this to the notion of mentoring, and we'll go over definition of that in a second here, is one of the things that I have encountered over time is that sometimes I can actually predict that the mentee is going to be late. It's just because of the way in which I'm interacting with them, and they have this way of, well, I'll show up 5 minutes or 10 minutes late. And I usually give them the first one. I don't give them the second one. We have a little chat at that point in time. I think, Doug, you'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
I do, and I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Great.
So using that example that you gave and your definition of predictability, is there a danger in forming a bias?
True. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess that would be is maybe there's a reason for the person being late, right? So good point. Yeah. Good point. Well, the other one is example of predictability is the sun rising every morning. I think we could say that that's predictable. Will it be clouds there, or is it a sunny day? I don't know. We never quite know about that part of it, but that's another way to look at predictable. And I also dug around. I said, well, what is some synonyms of predictability? And I came up with coherence. And I thought, okay, I think if we sort of work with the ladder of predictability and we add coherence to it, it's the quality of being logical and consistent and the quality of forming a whole, or this notion of integration. And so when I read that, I sat back and I went, I think that's what mentoring is about, right? It's finding a way to be logical and consistent and forming a whole, to integrate, to bring some ideas together while you're mentoring with the mentee. Still leaving it open for, sometimes there's some spontaneity needs to be there and that, but at the same time, there is this sense of coherence, this sense of predictability that we may be looking for into mentoring relationship. And I think we'll open this up more, and this is where I'll get Doug, because he has all these great practical examples of those that he is currently mentoring. I don't do as much as what Doug does, so we'll get into that. But I think there's a really important question we need to ask ourselves, and I'll just do a little pause before I go forward, and it's, why is predictability important? And if you want to stop there and answer that yourself, you can. If not, let's keep going. So the importance of predictability is that in many ways, it provides a pathway, like stones on the pathway. And what you can do is sometimes people interrupt that, and is it a help or a hindrance? In other words, there might be some default patterns, right? I mentioned one already from the mentoring point of view. The mentee is always showing up late. To Doug's point, there might be something there. Maybe it's just their default pattern of how they come to meetings, right? And what we got to do is think it through. So there's this notion of the stones on the pathway. Another reason that predictability is important is from a psychological safety point of view, and in all ways, right? Physical, mental, solual, spiritual, all the different ways in which to be thinking about, okay, how do we make sure that there's some predictability around the psychological safety? And that fits into the world that Doug really gets into, and mentoring is around the notion of the mental health. Is there anything you want to add to that one, Doug?
It is important to be in tune with the psychological safety aspect of it, so the environment that you're creating for that conversation to take place, because you can, from a predictability perspective, and with having had exposure to a number of similar or like situations, there can be an element of predictability as to what potential outcomes could be if you follow a certain path.
And we'll get into that, but I think the phrasing there, to be in tune with, all right, that's that sense of the integration, being able to take in the whole landscape of what's unfolding in front of you is really important. And to be able to have some element of predictability in that is useful. And that's why we have some considerations and things that the mentee can do that the mentor can help with. That's what we're going to cover a little bit later. Another reason that predictability is important is to understand the connection between expectation and commitment, or an estimate and promise keeping. All right. A lot of us in our conversations will say things like, "Oh yeah, I'll get that done. It'll be done sometime the end of the week." And I go, "Okay, that's an estimate expectation." If I was to say, "No, I'll get that done by Thursday at 12 noon, you'll have it on your desk, it'll be in a report format," then I can lean into, okay, that's a promise-keeping commitment. And the predictability is I'm looking for a little bit more, in most times when I'm mentoring, as I'm looking more for the language of commitment and promise-keeping, than I am from this notion of expectations and estimates. Now that's me, all right. And Doug, do you have anything you want to add to that one?
The only thing I would add would be accountability, and
Okay,
how that would be the one word that I would slide in amongst the ones that you've already mentioned.
for sure. The accountability for what you are committing to, agreeing to, and responsibility to get it done, kind of idea.
Well,
Yeah,
and it also takes us back to the aspect of forming a whole. So I'm accountable for helping you become whole or become one as a person. So being able to, if you have skeletons in your closet, to use that as the analogy, is what do we need to do to deal with those so that we can get you to a place where you are whole as a person, mind, body, and spirit.
yeah. And this notion of the importance of predictability goes for the mentor and the mentee. I may not have said that clearly at the beginning when I mentioned it, but you just reminded me to go, oh, I better add that one in. So there we go. A fourth really important reason for predictability is this notion of clarity and confidence. These are measures that I'm looking for. Is there clarity in what's happening and confidence to be able to move forward? And when you have some sense of this predictability, this notion of logical and consistent, it's this notion of anticipating what might be happening. It sort of gives me some sense. Oh, I think I've got clarity of where this is going. Yeah, I can be surprised. But I also have this notion of I have confidence that I can sit here and I can do this. And if you can get the mentee feeling clarity and confidence, those are great ways of looking at this mentoring connection arrangement is actually working. So Doug, I'd like to maybe take a look at this question. Let's see what happens for the two of us, all right? When does predictability move from being a strength to a weakness? Any thoughts on that one from your perspective?
Hmm. I'm just as I'm looking at it from the aspect of, so predictability as a strength and then predictability as a weakness. And I think it takes me back to the whole, for a weakness is, if I'm from a bias perspective, I would suggest that predictability then becomes a weakness, where you're assuming that you know what the outcomes are going, you're predicting what the outcomes are going to be based on perhaps past experiences and that. But the one thing that's really important is that every time you go into a mentoring conversation, a mentoring arrangement, you need to go in open-minded with the understanding that every situation is going to be different, and we have to be in a place or in a position to be able to kind of go with the flow and be able to deal with that. So I would say that it can move from being a strength to a weakness if you allow your bias to take over your journey on that pathway that you've talked about.
Yeah, for sure. And I would add to it, and you sort of hinted at it here, is let's just use the example of asking questions. One of the things you're attempting to do as a mentor, right, is get the mentee to ask you questions. You want to get to that point as quickly as possible so you can help the mentee. But if you haven't helped prepare the mentee for that, you can't predict, well, when we meet next time, they're going to be asking me questions, right? Even though you know that the mentoring arrangement is about entering into questions, taking a look at what's going on. Sometimes you might trip over your own feet. And that's when I think sometimes we can get into, it becomes a little bit of a hindrance. And that's why we wanted to mention about the considerations and the 7 things mentees can do as they move into the world of the mentoring arrangement, the mentoring connection. But we've been tossing around the word mentoring here, Doug. I think it's time for us to share how we look at it and then link it to predictability from an IMC definition. So you want to share the definition with us?
I sure can. So mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where both the mentor and mentee are going to learn and develop together on a personal and professional basis.
So in that definition, there's an aspect of the predictability, personal and professional development, is that if you're entering into it, the way that we see it is that you're going to get something out of it personally and professionally for both. And that's why it's a two-way trusted relationship. There is some element of predictability there. And that's, I wanted to highlight. Unfortunately, sometimes what happens is the mentor or the mentee may get the notion is that it sort of falls into a routine, and you sort of, you keep seeming to doing the same thing all the time, and that's unfortunate because it doesn't bring that life, that that life-giving aspect. It doesn't bring the whole story out all the time. And I just wanted to bring that out from that definition because I think that that was important. You want to add anything to that at this point?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay. So I think to that point, instead of going into every week, sort of doing the same kind of thing, it's good to mix up the topics, right? At least give the mentee some sense of where we're going to go next time, or if you're going to bring a question, what might that question be? There's the delivery you can mix up a little bit, and Doug's great at sharing stories. I love to share stories with people versus asking them a question, a mentee. There's the format, okay? Maybe what we do is we go at 8 o'clock in the morning, and next time might be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right? The format, the place may shift up. All right. And maybe use a little bit of unpredictability, right? And that's that spontaneous openness and just sort of, okay, where might we go here? What might happen to us? And to be able to allow the mentee to understand it. So in many ways, you're taking into consideration the who and the when, who's there, because sometimes you might use this approach with mentee A, and you have mentee B, and it doesn't mean mentee A's way of doing things and mentee B is the same thing. There are some commonalities, but you gotta, mix it up and understand there's some uniqueness here for the mentees. Sometimes you can't go in thinking, well, if the topic is mentoring in the workplace, and the next person's mentoring in the workplace, the next person's mentoring in the workplace, it may not actually be under that banner, because to Doug's point is sometimes you may have to go, hang on a minute, there might be some other elements of what's going on in that person's life that needs to be taken a look at before we dig into the professional. You may have to go to the personal person. That's why we bring both of those out in the definition. Sometimes it can be the time together. I've had like a 3-minute mentor in my life. Right? I'll never ever meet that person, but what that person did for me was unbelievable in that 3 minutes when I reflected on it. I was the mentee at that point in time, and that person was my mentor. That's how I look at it. But sometimes mentoring can go on for years, and some people actually get to a point where they're both mentor and mentee in this ongoing relationship that moves people along. And just to remind everyone, the sort of space and place considerations. Space has that little bit more of a sense of the informal, the background. Place, more formal and in the foreground. I just want to make mention of that. And that's being able to understand the whole. So these are elements, ideas for you to think about when you are into your mentoring arrangement, mentoring connection. And take note, mentees, if you're listening into this, how might you look at bringing this to the mentor so that you both can have this two-way trusted relationship? So, Doug, we'll move on to 3 considerations and 7 things for mentees to look at. We're always asked for, okay, can you give us, 1, 2, 3s or ABCs or whatever? And we thought we would offer these up to you today. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen here and offer up to you is that there are three main considerations for you to look at in this mentoring arrangement, mentoring connection. And they are, the first one is this notion of forward thinking. Actually, when we created the title for this, we were going to talk about forward thinking for the predictability of mentoring. And then we went, oh, hang on a minute, there's more to it than just forward thinking. And that's why we want to go over at least these three. Again, you may add more into the notion of what's going on. So just want to check, seems someone's trying to get in through our Facebook group. Nope, that was a misinformation message. Okay, so the idea here of forward thinking is that's that notion of the predictability, looking forward, and it's about favoring innovation, favoring development, ensure that there's some forward movement. So as a mentor working with a mentee, I'm also popping out there a little bit to sort of go, okay, are we both profiting from this? And I'm not mentioning money. It could be relationship. It could be ideas. It could be where is it that we're going? There could be the notion of sustainability. Is this going to be sustainable? Or do I have to look at this? Maybe I have to close it down. Sustainability in terms of, okay, is there the correct use of resources that they're working with? I sometimes have to have this a little bit of a forward thinking aspect in the mentoring. And if you encourage the mentee as well, that really language that we use between Doug and I is deepen and enrich the mentoring arrangement. And also it's to be clear about what issues are you dealing with and what initiatives are you coming up with. That really becomes important. And a little fine tune there, you'll notice I use the word issue. I didn't say what's the problem you're looking at, because issues are really the questions, and the questions could be a problem or the question could be an appreciation. What I'm getting at is there's a problem to be solved, or there's an appreciation to be extended. And that's why I use issue in this notion. So forward thinking is playing around in that, and I'm being purposeful, playing around in it, because you may not necessarily have all the ideas, but this notion of forward thinking, that will help you with your predictability of mentoring. Thoughts on that one you want to add in, Doug?
The one thing I will say, coming back to the idea of issue and problem, is that with issues, if they're not addressed at the particular time point, they will eventually become problems.
Yeah, and that's the idea. Even appreciation is that you know that you want to take something forward that's working, and you don't, it can actually turn into a problem, and then that gets you sort of falling behind, stepping back a little bit, and that's unfortunate. The next one that I wanted to go over was the notion of obstacle is the way. Now, this one's kind of an interesting one, is that whatever the challenge is there that you're facing, face it, right? And that's why we always talk about mentoring as an approach, not using mentoring as avoidance. We're attempting to get people to go, well, if this is not working, then I have to move forward, obviously without doing harm to anyone, self or others, is to face it and move forward, to deal with the adversity that's present, and to be able to take advantage of that. In the world of entrepreneurs, let me use this as an example because I've mentored some entrepreneurs, is a lot of times when they sort of run up a little bit against the entrepreneurial wall, they slide off to the side, and I'm going, no, this is something you got to find either a way around it, over it, under it, whatever direction you want to take. You've got to deal with this, because if not, it may come back to haunt you later. All right. And a great example of that is I've had to mentor people to go, look, you've got to deal with your finances. You can't just turn them over to your accountant and nothing will happen. So that has to be dealt with. So when I deal with my mentees, if there's something that's coming up that's really blocking them, I go, look, you're going to have to deal with this. And why don't we take a look at it at this point in time? Again, without doing harm to the person or harm to yourself, is paying attention to it. Anything you want to add to that one, Doug?
It's especially, I guess, important nowadays when it comes to mentoring and mental health and being able to work with somebody to be able to help them on their journey to healing and that. So it becomes, when you talk about the obstacle is the way, and whatever the challenge, face it, is that I've actually had experiences where I've been working with somebody who wanted to, say, create their own business as an entrepreneur, and we had to deal with some obstacles that they had, which could very well be some mental health challenges that they were struggling with and hadn't really taken the time or effort to be able to flesh out how they could deal with some of those. And as a result, it delayed the growth of their entrepreneurial spirit and the opportunity that they were wanting to pursue.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. The same sentiment in the ones that I've interacted with. And sometimes you get pushback from the mentee. No, I'll deal with that later. I'll deal with that. Okay, let's just take a look at it just to make sure that if you say you're going to deal with it later, understand what might be the repercussions. What's the forward thinking about that? And that's how these two can interact. The third one I wanted to go over, this notion of prepare for the worst, nurture for the better, is that sometimes when I know that I'm going into a mentoring conversation, I might take this approach. I might say, what might be the worst that could happen today in this mentoring arrangement, this mentoring connection, because of what's been happening? How might I think forward, all right, to be able to deal with the obstacle that's going to come up so I can actually nurture it to be better, because I might see something that's going to unfold here. So it gives me an opportunity to get into my preparation approach, the use of my prevention backpack. It gets me into, okay, how do I strengthen my practice so I can continue it with this person? And what it does for me, it gets to this phrase, is that I can be very clear that I'm going to respond and not react. If I just go into every mentoring connection arrangement and I don't sort of think ahead, forward thinking, what might be the obstacles, and use this prepare for the worst, nurture for the better, I might get sideswiped. And that's not something that I, as a mentor, prefer to do. I could talk about, some of the earlier examples, all right? And I said, no, I'm not. I'm going to go into know how to respond, not just react to this. Again, I offer anything you want to add to this one, Doug?
And I think you've already touched on it, but from a response perspective, it's a collaborative response. It's both mentor and mentee that need to be able to respond.
Right. Very, very important. Okay. I got something up on my screen here. Let's bring this one up. There we go. So the notion of what might be some considerations for the mentee. Now, Doug and I want to offer this to you as a mentors. How might you prepare the mentee to have these as well, and also for you as a mentor? And this is something that seems to get put to the side for some reason. I always encourage it, and when I'm talking to my mentees, I said, what do you know about me? Have you looked me up? Have you seen what I've done or anything like that? And people just, oh no, I'm just coming in because I was told to be here. Okay. All right, we got to start with then maybe we need to do a little bit deeper understanding of who we are. Because one of the things that I do is I make sure I've got a pretty good understanding of my mentee without forming bias, just to be able to get an understanding, okay, who am I talking? Entrepreneur, employee, right? That kind of idea. Am I, in my language, for example, are they nature informed or are they nature based, right? Nature informed is they use nature as the educating medium. Nature based is what can we do to make the planet better, all right? These kind of ideas. I'm very clear about the language I'm going to interact with. So this is something that I encourage. And especially for those mentees who are coming to mentors thinking, I need to tap into your speciality. Because sometimes mentors can show up in your life. They may not be in a speciality that you're connected with, but because they know how to mentor, they can be of great service to you. And I know Doug talks about this quite a bit. You want to add anything to that one, Doug?
Um, I think the one thing that jumped to mind was around lived experience and the aspect of industry specific experience, and that industry specific experience is a nice to have, not a need to have. So if I understand mentoring processes and concepts, and I'm able to have that deeper, richer mentoring experience with those that I'm working with, I don't necessarily need to have industry specific experience.
And that's why understanding the background of the mentee of the mentor, these are very important. And don't treat them lightly. Spend a bit of time getting to know who your mentee is, or if you're a mentee, get to know your mentor. So that takes care of the first one. The next one is, are you walking with an agenda, and is an agenda required? Thoughts about that one, Doug?
Well, you can look at an agenda from two aspects. Number one, you can look at it's a piece of paper with a list of things that we're going to talk about. The other aspect of an agenda is I'm going in with preconceived notions of how the conversation may unfold. And so I've already determined or predetermined what the agenda of our meeting is going to be. And I think I know for me, I don't have an issue if we're going to create a paper-based agenda, or even if we have a format that we're going to follow. And I do that with some of the entrepreneurs that I'm mentoring today, is they create an agenda that we go through. So we go through all from their business plan, all of the tasks that they want to get accomplished while we're in the mentoring relationship. So we go through that. We also go through the financials. So we have an agenda per se of all the different things that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that also, to add to that, and you reminded me, is the notion of the predictability that goes with the agenda. But sometimes if you stick to the agenda and say, no, we're not going to talk about anything else, that's when the predictability can become a weakness because you may not be necessarily assisting that mentee with where they need to go for that moment in time. And that's something you've got to take a look at. Okay, it's a constant dynamic balance, right? As a mentor interacting with the mentee, I give you that. That's for sure. The next one we sort of touched on already a little bit, but I think it's great to go over it again, is mentee formulating some of the questions you want to ask your mentor, but mentor help the mentee learn how to ask great questions. It goes back and forth. Doug?
No, I agree. And I think it's really important that as a mentor that you understand the proper questioning technique to use in order to bring out your lived experience without it becoming a situation where you're telling them what to do. You know, if I were you, this is what I would do because I've done it that way for the last 30 years and it's worked well. No, that's not the approach to take. It would be better off if you were to say, what would happen if we were to do A, B, or C in order to address problem D?
Okay. The next one is the notion of reporting. And what I'm getting at here is, from a mentee point of view, what have been your results and what might be the research that you're doing? And what I'm talking about is results of, I've actually achieved this. You know what? I'm still looking, I'm poking around, trying to find some ideas to go with it. And to come to the conversation with the predictability, right? The coherence, this logical progression is that I'm looking at what I want to have a conversation with you, dear mentor, and you come forward with that. Doug?
What I would also see that's important from the reporting perspective is that it comes back to the whole idea. If you're going to be bringing a problem to our conversation, you should also be able to bring a solution that you're going to get from research that you've actually done, or previous experiences, results, all of those things. All of that should be brought to the table in response to the question or the issue you're trying to resolve.
For sure, for sure. Thanks for that. So the next one is the notion of, as a mentee, you will get feed forward and feed fromward from your mentor. If the mentor truly understands the definition of mentoring, they will be able to give you feed forward and feed fromward, just as you, dear mentee, will be able to assist the mentor with feed forward and feed fromward. But let me just take a look at these terms. Often we know the term feedback, and that's great, but the way that I look at feedback is you're going back into the history of what took place and sharing something with the person to bring their history to the present. Helpful? But there's another one called feed forward, which is how do I give you some insights, ideas in the present about what's going on so that you can move forward with what's taking place, not wait for later. It's right now in the moment. And the feed fromward is to be thinking about sometimes you've got to give the mentee insights based on the from aspect. Okay, you're interacting with me from this perspective. You want to learn a business. You want to learn yourself how to be a mentor. You're learning, and I give you insights about what you're doing now from that perspective back to the present. And that's why I make the distinction between feed forward, feed fromward, and the notion of feedback. And you have to come to all of this, I think, from the perspective, dear mentee, is that these are gifts. These are gifts from the mentor, and therefore you would want to have some predictability that you're going to get some of that feed forward and feed fromward. And if you're not, you may have to ask for it. Anything you want to add there, Doug?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. The next one to take a look at, and we've hinted at this already, the notion of commitment. Doug added the word accountability earlier. You can go back and listen to that section. But there is this notion of, from a mentee point of view, the more that you can ensure the commitment to what it is that's happening, the mentor has some sense of predictability, this clarity, consistency goes with it. But what it demonstrates for the mentor, dear mentee, is your courage. And that's one of the key aspects about your attitude, the courage that you have to move into that connection, that arrangement, with your commitments, that you're going to be present. If you want to get out, you can ask to get out. But if you're going to be there, then from a place of courage, your heart is in it for the time that you're going to be there, then that becomes a gift you're giving to the mentor in a sense. And the mentor has some sense of the predictability that's going to be there for that. Doug?
In a lot of the questions that I get asked, one of the ones that stands out that this would fit in quite nicely with is, what would you say what would you say is one of the most important things that both parties need to, both the mentor and the mentee need to understand and practice in a mentoring relationship? And that is the commitment to that relationship. Is that if one of us is not committed to the journey that lies ahead, we're probably going to get lost, and it's not going to be a successful journey whatsoever. But if we're both committed to the relationship and willing to put the time, effort, and resources to that relationship that are needed, then we have a greater chance of having a successful committed mentoring relationship.
Great. Thank you. So the last one that I would just mention, dear mentee, is show gratitude. When you show gratitude, even through things like thank you, right? Appreciate what it is that we're talking about, show that gratitude, and you weave it in, not as a platitude to sort of, okay, dear mentor, I'll take care of you and I'll say thank you all the time. I'm not talking about from that point, but if you genuinely, right, appreciate what's going on, say thanks. We encourage mentors to do that all the time, is show the gratitude to the mentee for them being here. If they're committed, right, they're sharing their results and their research, they're asking you questions, then show the gratitude that goes with it. But dear mentee, please show the gratitude in return to the mentor. It's not, again, that you're stroking ego or anything like that. It's just that you know that there's another human being fully human, being natural across from you. Show something in return, not just answering their questions or coming up with questions, but actually thanking them for what's going on. Thoughts, Sarah?
I actually had a mentee that I had worked with for quite a period of time, and she was getting married and actually invited me to the wedding and to the reception and that afterwards, and had told me right straight to my face that both her and her husband could not imagine getting married without me being in attendance. And they said that, you've done so much for us as a mentor and helped us along that it's only fitting that you be here on our special day.
Wow, that's beautiful. I don't think you've ever told me that story, so thank you for sharing that one. Wow, that's great. I can actually, that touches me. So thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. Well, with that, I think what we're doing is we're heading towards close here, Doug. And so maybe I'll just remind everyone is that we took a look at this sense of predictability of mentoring, and we looked at the word predictability and brought another word, coherence, to that. Covered off a little bit about why is predictability important, and linked that to mentoring and some of the things to think about when you're looking at predictability and mentoring. And some of the things are like topic and time together and space and place considerations. And then we unfolded three main considerations for you so that you could take a look at your mentoring connection arrangement, one being forward thinking, another being the obstacle is the way, and the other one being prepare for the worst, nurture for the better. And we were asked many times, what is it that a mentee could do? And we offer this with the caveat, mentor, how do you encourage the mentee to do these kind of ideas, take these kind of steps, show these action outcomes as you move forward as a mentee. So we shared those with you today. And as we move towards close, like every mentoring lounge, I'll give Doug the last words, and I know that once he shares them, I'll just say take care and we'll close it down. But the reason we do this is that I get to do the opening, Doug gets to do the closing. That's how we help each other out as we move forward here in the International Mentoring Lounge, right, is to be able to share all things mentoring from the International Mentoring community. Again, just remind you, Wednesdays, 10 a.m. Mountain Time would be Mountain Daylight Time, Mountain Standard Time is when we do this mentoring lounge, and it goes to our YouTube channel where you can pick it up from a live perspective there or the recording. And we also put it into our Facebook page around mental health and mentoring. And so with that, Doug, you get to close us off. And when I know you're done, I'll just say thank you and we'll close down the stream. So over to you.
The one thing that I would love to see our listeners take away from this is the aspect of making sure that predictability is not influenced by bias. And that's really an important thing when you're going in to have a conversation, is that if you're predicting, or if you've already predetermined, predicted what you think the outcomes are going to be, you're doing so with some form of bias, and that isn't in the best interests of a mentoring relationship.